Okay, so we'll get us started here. Thank you, everybody, for arriving on this sunny day at this closed landfill site. So I'm Laura Bishop, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you and to welcome our special guests here. So we have Governor Walz, we have Senator Abeler, we have Mayor Trude, and Councilwoman Holtus. Yeah. So Councilmember Holtus with us today. And I also want to thank so many people that have worked on this project, from the Department of Health, from the city staff and our city council members, to our public safety officials and Fire Chief Strike. Thank you very much for being here. And the Coon Creek Watershed District. We have a number of representatives of the Coon Creek Watershed District here today that have worked on this project. And also a special thank you to Representative Peggy Scott. She can't be here today, unfortunately, but she was really the person that drove so much of this at the legislature in this project, and I know we'll all mention her. She was so instrumental in securing all the financing for the WDE landfill. This cleanup effort is our #1 state priority, and with that, this was the #1 bill and the first bill that was signed. So it shows the importance of this. It's been worked on for a long time. And the 122-acre landfill here that we're standing on is the only one in Minnesota that was ever permitted for hazardous waste disposal. And because of this, it poses a high environmental risk, and it's imperative that we clean it up. And finally, we're getting to do that. And you see it behind me under the white enclosure. We estimate that there are 6,600 drums of waste that date back to the 70s. The landfill closed in 1983, and since then we've taken a Band-Aid approach as the state to deal with approaches with pollution in this pit. However, the temporary Band-Aids are expensive and hard to maintain over time, and did not fix the problem. Now we are cleaning it up and fixing the problem. And funding like this, for cleanups like this, are good for the environment. We have 114 closed landfills in the state, and that we're looking at on how to manage. This is the only one with hazardous waste that we have in the state, but we've still got to manage all of our closed landfills and find a better way to deal with all of our waste as well. So you see the garbage pile over here. This is part of the landfill as well. Gives you a glimpse in what's in our landfills all across the state. We need to find a better way to deal with all of this, and we can start by reducing the amount of waste we generate, whether it be through reusing materials or doing a better job of recycling. There really is no away. When you throw things away, it ends up here, as we know. And so thanks to funding in the legislature, not only are we cleaning up this one, but we also have ways to manage our waste. We're looking at food recycling and organics recycling. More than 30% of what we throw away is organic material, such as food waste. And a large portion of that can be rescued from grocery stores or retail stores and be used to feed people. We need to find ways to deal with our organic waste. In addition, removing organics from the waste stream will reduce our need for these expensive landfills in the future. We've also need to find ways to incentivize recycling markets. And the legislature provided grants to incentivize recycling markets. Right now, domestic recycling markets have been flooded in the wake of China's decision to stop accepting material from the U.S., and it's imperative that we act and support local markets here in Minnesota to broker that can cover their costs and recycling waste that could be viable. With that, I also, before I turn it over to Governor Walz, I want to thank him and everyone else at the state and local level for funding and supporting this project. I want to welcome Representative Urdahl, who's joined us now as well. This has been a group effort and one that cuts across parties. It's an important piece that we've seen as something to get done, and it is my great pleasure to make this a priority and to work on behalf of the state to ensure that we are supporting and enhancing the environment and health of our citizens. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Governor Walz. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, thank you all for being out here. A special thank you to the number of media out here. It's an unusual backdrop for a press conference to have a landfill. You followed the road out here, but you also got to see, and I think many of you were noticing and speaking to the mayor. Thank you for your advocacy, and council member. This has been, I knew about this issue when I was serving as a member of Congress from the 1st District of Minnesota, so I know your voice was being heard. But pointing out where the water tower is, where the city buildings are, where the high school is, you came by the ballpark, of understanding that this is a hazardous waste site. It's also right in the middle of a vibrant community. So I think many of you being here recognize that. Representative Urdahl, thank you for the work you do. Your partner in Representative Murphy not being here on the bonding committee also deserves thanks. Senator Abeler, your voice in representing this area and making this very clear that this needed to be done. And I am going to say it, that I hope when the story is told, Representative Peggy Scott made this a priority. She did what a representative is supposed to do. She used all the tools at her disposal to make sure that every single one of us were never very far from this issue. And I was just mentioning that Representative Scott was one of the first people to congratulate me after I had won the election, and she quickly segued to now do this first and get this done. So she was looking across all the bases. So I think it's appropriate that I wish she were here, but I know she would take this. So here we are, finally, closing the WDE landfill, closing Peggy's Pit, as it was called, and she took that with a source of pride when people said that. She told me, you're right, and I'm going to be the one to get it done. This is happening on a day that if those who said this would never get done or we couldn't get there, the Twins turned a triple play, hit 5 home runs, and beat the Yankees. So things can get done. Things can get done. But the commissioner is right. There's several factors. I am very proud that this was the very first thing that I signed into law on the day that we signed 2 pieces of legislation, that we broke that mantra that it wasn't a bonding year. It clearly was, and that this was a top priority. And as the commissioner said, and my responsibility as governor and the elected leaders here, the safety and security and health of our constituents is the #1 thing that we do. Everything else falls into order behind that. And this piece of ground, with the process that was done, and we know much more now, put people at risk. And so I appreciate the commissioner has been clear about this. This is a top priority to close this and do this right. And then I think what we all need to recognize is this was $10.3 million. This will be an ongoing monitoring and making sure this remains safe. And there are others across Minnesota. This is simply the most hazardous one, but we are going to have to recognize, as the commissioner said, what we generate is going to have to be dealt with. And she's exactly right that we focused. If we really want to reduce carbon emissions, then reduce food waste. It's a piece of it because of the amount of carbon that goes into creating it, and then the waste that goes with it, and where it ends up in the landfill. And you see the sophisticated nature of the sand, the fill, the trash, everything being put back in here. It's much better if we reduce that footprint. It saves us money, and it's much more sustainable for us. But I can tell you that this project was a really great introduction for me into state governments, into building partnerships across party lines, about finding ways to get things done when people have been told no over and over, always with the clear and shared values that the people of Andover and the people of Minnesota deserve to know that their children and their families are safe and secure, and that anything that's in the ground or in the air, that we're doing something about it to reduce those risks. So I'm just really proud to be here with this group. I did apologize to the mayor. I'm sorry it took so long for this community. It really did. And I think there's a sense of we maybe found the formula here, how to get this done, to maybe accelerate that timeline. But it does not happen without true partners. It does not happen without strong voices. It does not happen without people from the community speaking for the community. So it's with that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you a strong advocate for not only this project, but for the community, and someone I'm proud to call a friend, Senator Abeler.
Oh, great. Thank you. And what an exciting moment. And in a time when people get kind of cynical that stuff just isn't working out, government can actually work. And I think a tribute to Governor Walz and Representative Scott, who, if you talk to them about many things, they don't have a total agreement. But we can work together and solve problems that are really important, and that's my 2 cents worth. And, you know, I try to always look to the positive. And, you know, America is a great country, and Minnesota is one of the better states, but we have our challenges, and it could be better. But look what we accomplished today by working together. So happy to be a small part of that. Representative Scott, tireless, day in, day out. She did keep us, shall we say, on message and on point. And just hope she celebrates this day where she's at. Thank you. And then it's my good honor to represent my good friend, Representative Dean Urdahl, who has spent a great deal of time on matters like this across the state. So.
Thank you, Jim and Governor. And first of all, I'm glad to be here in spite of my GPS system. You realize that there is a similar address in Ham Lake. So I know all about Ham Lake today. And thankfully, we were on Senate time, so I could be late and still be on time. But you know, a lot of thank yous have been given. I want to echo some of this. You know, I chaired the Capital Investment Committee for a couple of years, and you know, through that, working with Mr. Kudelka and Ms. Gauthier and the mayor here, Senator Abeler, certainly Representative Scott, previously Governor Dayton, now Governor Walz, but there are a lot of people who did a lot of work to make sure that this happened. And when I did chair the committee, we put it in our bonding bill that did pass. Unfortunately, our funding mechanism for this was deemed a little controversial. And so it was determined that the best way around the controversy was simply to do the bill again. And Representative Murphy, the new chair of the committee, took over that responsibility. But there were still a lot of roadblocks. When we came in last session, we had, of course, a new governor, a new Senate narrow majority, and the House had changed. The majority had changed, so the committee chairmanships had changed. But still, the problems remained and needed to be solved. I thought we should do the bonding bill right away and have this project in it. Really, in terms of doing a bonding bill, this was the major reason to do one at all. And so I advocated to do a bonding bill soon. Everyone didn't agree with me. There was a lot of reticence about do we need to do this? You know, should we still challenge the courts and try to fund it the way they'd originally planned? And you know, one thing led to another, and then you know, Representative Scott pretty much daily saying something to me about Peggy's Pit, and so we eventually got into some negotiations. I remember talking to folks about really the need to do this, because that's our responsibility as state legislatures, as the governor, to make sure that the people of Minnesota are safe. And when we have literally the potential of a health crisis right here, if we don't do something, it's just paramount that we get it done. And I asked, you know, why can't we do this? And I actually had someone say, well, what do we get out of it if we do this? And I said, a better state and satisfaction that you are doing the right thing. And in the end, that's what it's all about. That Governor Walz and Democrats and Republican leadership in the House, and eventually all of the members, came together and did this simply because it is the right thing to do. And so it's a good example of what government can do when our hearts and minds are in the right places. And I look forward to future endeavors like this, where we do legislation simply because we should. So with that, thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks for coming out. Hi, I'm Andover Mayor Julie Trude, and on behalf of the families of Andover, I want to deliver a heartfelt thank you to all of you who've showed tenacity in securing the funding and explaining why the funding was needed for the removal of this hazardous site in the middle of our community. As many of you drove here, you saw surrounding this, we have parks, we have schools, we have many houses, and it's a very dense area of our community. We have businesses, we have shoppers, workers, school children in the vicinity of this landfill every day. And to have this cleanup complete provides many of us peace of mind. And that's what the state of Minnesota gave us with this project, is peace of mind. Although our city water has never been affected and private wells were tested, have not been affected, and I can assure everyone that we have safe drinking water in Andover, the threat or risk of something going wrong here is being reduced with the removal of this pit. And so we all have peace of mind. I saw some interviews last night of people at the baseball park, and they all expressed a concern about their children and families. And those are concerns I took to our leaders at the Capitol, and they heard those concerns, and they've delivered us peace of mind, and we all feel that the state of Minnesota cares about the public's health with the funding of this project. I have some specific thank yous I wish to deliver. I have some tenacious workers. Our Representative Peggy Scott, our Senator Jim Abeler worked very hard on this project. Our City Administrator Jim Dickinson, standing in the back, worked very hard on this project because it took not just one session, but it took 3 sessions at the Capitol, because we had funding to study the project, initial funding that we thought was adequate, learned after studies it was inadequate, had to go back. Then the funding wasn't secure because of the method. It had to be a do-over. So we had Governor Dayton very involved with all of his staff, and now Governor Walz and his staff. We had Commissioner Stein during 2 sessions, and we have Commissioner Bishop, who brought it to the finish line. We had an active, involved resident, Frank Kellogg, who brought this to our attention over and over again and pushed for the best solution for our community's long-term health and future. We have other advocates that worked on this. Our neighboring representative, Mark Uglum, who's now retired, worked on this. Our Senator Michelle Benson, Senator Jerry Newton, and our neighboring community Representative Melissa Hortman, who grew up in Andover, helped bring this to the finish line. We had leaders at the Senate level 2 years ago, Senator Senjan, and this past year, Senator Ingebretson. We had Representative Urdahl, who he and I have become pretty good friends over all of this. And we have Representative Torkelson. And then from MPCA staff, we have Kurt Kudelka, who's here today. If he waves, people will see where he's at. And we have Greta Gautier, who brought a lot of information to the senators and representatives at the Capitol. And now we have Cliff Shirk, who's managing the project and will have a long-term presence. And I guess that's where it'll finish, is that the pit will be removed, but the landfill remains a site that will be managed and controlled by the MPCA staff. And they've assured our community with their excellent communications that they're going to be here for the long haul, protecting our public health, and we appreciate that. It's a promise that they've shown they can deliver on, and our community is very grateful. So thank you for the peace of mind you've delivered to Andover residents with this project. Thank you.
We can open it up to questions and answers here as well, if people have questions.
Governor, I always like to know lessons learned when you have a success and kind of the carry forward. How does this help heading into a bonding session?
Yeah, and first of all, I was just mentioning with the folks involved with this, this is about a decade-long process. You heard the mayor talk about the starts and stops. I think the biggest thing, and I talked about early as being a new governor coming in, some changes that Representative Urdahl talked about. It's important to start building up trust, and I think this was one of the, as I said, the first day I signed things, this was one of 2 pieces of legislation, and it was to find that common goal and then to find that coalition of voices that could be responsive to the people of Minnesota. And I think this model, you hear us talk about, we use this model to address that throughout the session. I think we followed along with that. And it was just really good to understand and keep in mind security and safety and well-being of the people of Minnesota, listening to the local officials, and then partnering together to see what could be done. So it was, this is the way it should be done. It, again, should not have taken this long. My hope is that we recognize, and it's hard, I get it, it is hard. It is $10.3 million that we would rather build a new school, or we would rather pave some highway, or do a lot of highway if possible. But those are the things that people see, but we have to manage this. This is not a, that's why I said I'm so glad that the press is here. Not a real glamorous project to dig out hazardous waste and then fill it back in with garbage, but it is a priority. So we have to make sure we use this model of, this just was just a necessity. And when it came to me and it came to Commissioner Bishop, I remember the first time we sat down, she looked at me and she says, this needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. Let's figure out where the politics are to make that happen.
Commissioner Bishop, is there any kind of risk to the workers? What is that like for them to be around this project?
Sure. So, you know, when you're cleaning up any hazardous site, there are risks with that. That's why we've hired teams that have extensive experience in this, that can handle and have handled hazardous waste as well. So we don't know everything that we're going to find in there. And I think that's the piece. We know that this has been a hazardous waste disposal site, and we can kind of think about what could be in there, whether it's paints or other chemicals when we've tested the ground, but we really don't know. There could be sharps and needles, and we want to make certain that the workers are taking every safety precaution, and that's why we've hired skilled and experienced groups that handle hazardous waste.
Question for the mayor.
Mayor.
Hi, Mayor Trude. I just wanted to ask you about what you've learned in talking to residents about the history of this, and why would the state burn it hazardous waste? I mean, it was the 70s, but what have you learned about the history and how that even happened in the first place?
Well, the history precedes the city of Andover. Andover is a very young community, and so it was out in the middle of nowhere. There were junkyards lining Bunker Boulevard, and this seemed like a logical place back in the 70s to have people dump their garbage. As we know, many farms just thought the back pasture was a good garbage dump. Well, at that time, this community was called Grove Township, and it was the outer reaches of the metro area. I mean, look at the housing surrounding the inner ring housing. That's 60s, 50s, and 60s. Blaine, some of the housing began in the 60s and 70s. So this area, some of the oldest housing is some of the farm homes, but the first developments were in the 80s. And so now we've had really brisk development since 2000. The population went from 20,000 to 30,000 from 2000 to 2010. Now we're at about 34,000. And I think, as you see here today, it looks like a grassy park with a fence around it. I was often at the park nearby with my children, and we would see big deer in here. And there was always this talk about who'd get a license to come in and maybe bow hunt the big buck that lived on this ground. So it was seen as just a serene place by the time our major housing boom occurred. And I think the maintenance of the site, as I began to learn more as a new council member, we had excellent history from Jean Hansen, former Minnesota Pollution Control Agency representative for this area. And she worked with a high school. The high school opened in 2002, was the first graduating class. It opened in 2001, and then 2002 was the first class. They actually had the science class was cleaning up along the creek. My son was one of those kids cleaning along the creek. And then we found out that wasn't probably a good idea. So since then, the monitoring wells have shown us that the creek is safe, and we have people here from Coon Creek Watershed today who are making sure that it's tested regularly and the water in the creek is safe. But that wasn't always the case, and that's why some of these projects started. So since I've been on the city council and as mayor, the MPCA keeps changing its plans of management, and they finally decided the plan of removing this truck by truck was not a good plan. It was costing so much money. It was more cost effective and reduced the risk for the neighborhoods by doing a big project. So we appreciate their ongoing prudence in evaluating how best to treat this in the midst of a growing community. And when you look at housing in the Twin Cities, we have a shortage. And so we want to have all the communities that can develop be safe places for families to locate. So I think they've done a great job.
Other questions? Great, thank you all. Thanks for coming.